Our final speaker before we have the panel is Josephine Briggs, who will be providing a federal research funded perspective from the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine.
Well, this superb workshop has been filled with important advice for federal funders. The issues that are being talked about here yesterday and today are very central in the eye of NIH leadership. We had a leadership meeting on Thursday and Friday, and a day essentially was spent on issues related to big data and data sharing. And there are just so many moving pieces in the things that need to be done to promote data sharing that I think my comments are only, in fact, going to cover a few of the highlights. Dr. Kozel's story of the challenges she has personally faced illustrate a number of them. Many of these do have partial fixes in the works, but there is, in fact, incredible need, as has been talked about so effectively in the last day and a half. Could I have, or here, I guess I do this. So as I think all of you are aware, NIH has a data sharing policy and implementation guidance. It's now almost 10 years old, and it has certainly been a building block in the issues that are being talked about today. A separate public venture for data sharing under different legislative authority is clinicaltrials.gov. And the authorities for these two activities are not identical and have some important differences. But certainly a point that's been made here today is the incredible impact that journal policies had in increasing the impact of clinicaltrials.gov. So we, in all of our areas where the funders can make a difference, partnerships are going to be absolutely critical. And our legislative authorities to do things, sizable as they are only effective when they are amplified by a variety of kinds of partnerships. In many ways, I view the data sharing policy as a very modest baby step in the things that need to be done in this arena. And I think most of my colleagues at the NIH, other IC directors, would share that perspective. I am also temporarily leading the CTSA program. The CTSAs are another setting in which we have and continue to make a major investment in data sharing. Part of data sharing is making sure that academic institutions are taking good care of data. Certainly a major problem for the whole data sharing movement would be data that is not properly shared. Elaine Collier, who's here with me today, has been an important advocate for the need for policies in data sharing that ensure uniform and effective implementation of appropriate protection of data sets. And this is an area that we are thinking and worrying about, particularly in the setting of our investment in academic medical centers through the CTSA program. Another part of our investment in data sharing is the creation of electronic tools for data sharing. Some of these have been mentioned in the context of the last couple of days, last day and a half, including I2B2, which was discussed by the Johnson & Johnson representative as a useful tool for consolidating data sets, IDASH, which was discussed this morning, REDCap. But I chose in pulling together some information for this talk to mention three areas where we are investing in data sharing. And just to talk very quickly in the 10 minutes I've been allocated about what is happening in these three arenas. First, we are investing in data standards. We had lots of discussion yesterday about the complexity of development of data standards, and it is indeed a complex and difficult process, as many people in this room are well aware. The approach of getting a bunch of experts and locking them in a room and hoping that data standards will emerge is one that's widely used and kind of works. You get expert-driven medicine out of it, whether or not an effective consensus comes together and whether or not one ends up with competing sets of data standards is probably partly dependent upon the ability of the funders to provide some leadership and direction. And some parts of the NIH have been pretty effective at this. Some communities have been better at this than others. But certainly an important part of data standard development is, again, a collaborative activity with the communities of experts, and it is in fact communities. There is usually not a single group who cares about the data standards. This is one example of a common data element development process led by NINDS. Walter Korschutz mentioned this yesterday. It's, I think, been quite terrific. NINDS is now mandating utilization of data standards in those disease areas where they have successfully developed them. On the other hand, there are ways in which the data element sets are specific to disease communities, and sometimes there's not agreement on how you describe demographic variables in different data sets. So we clearly need a continued push in the area of data standards. And my colleagues in the National Library of Medicine lead an activity called BMIC, which is a trans-NIH group that is collating currently data standards, at least to produce a list of the Tower of Babel, of all the languages that are being spoken. Another type of NIH investment in this area is actually creating data sharing resources. And again, I think this is an important area where those of us with leadership jobs at the NIH realize much more could be done. Here are a couple examples. These data sharing resources are largely disease specific, led by one or other institute and center. The NIDA has been the National Institute of Drug Abuse has been very active in this area. The sharing of data that come from clinical trials in drug abuse is highly sensitive. It's an area where both investigators and patients have been very cautious about sharing, but the development of data sharing approaches and an expectation that major studies share data has been very effectively implemented. This illustrates I think the complexities of NIH policy in the area. The data sharing policy calls for a data sharing and monitoring, a data sharing plan for every study that has a budget over $500,000. The other area that NIH is able to essentially require data sharing plans is in cooperative agreements, and many large trials that are run by the NIH are funded as cooperative agreements, and in the beginning stages of a cooperative agreement, it is now increasingly customary for the study group to develop data sharing policies, and then those essentially become mandates. In investigator-initiated studies, particularly those with budgets under $500,000, our policies are not as clear as to what authority we have to set expectations for data sharing. And clearly the strongest incentive we have is that we do control the purse strings. And by setting expectations, even in smaller grants, that data sets be shared, this is a strong place to stand. Nonetheless, in many institutes, there is some reluctance to utilize data sharing expectations as part of our mandate. A place where that reluctance does not exist, and one that I have considered to be a real model in oversight in this area, is in Heart, Lung, and Blood, which has for a long time set very clear, unambiguous expectations for data sharing in large trials and to a certain extent even in smaller trials. And they do fund a large coordinating center with a capacity to solve a lot of the problems that we've heard discussed in the last 2 days about data sharing, including review for what the IRB consent is, appropriate to sharing the data, including the preparation of de-identified data sets. I think the experience in Heart, Lung, and Blood is that by and large, in spite of this big investment in resources for data sharing, that a lot of the most effective data sharing occurs as collaborations, occurs as a dyad or group efforts in which the original investigators are part of the continued use of the data. But certainly many useful analyses are occurring with the BioLink as a very valuable starting point. I mentioned this is a committee, a trans-NIH committee. Dr. Collier serves on this committee. It is led by the National Library of Medicine, and they are a working group to improve the implementation of existing policy, to develop a consensus on best practices for program staff, to develop a guidance document for awardees on data sharing plans, to catalog the common data elements, and to encourage alignment between the standards being used in places like SNOMED and LOINC, and have those align with the data sets that are being used for research. Huge challenges. A new initiative that's being discussed extensively is one you've heard about in several settings in the last day and a half, a notion that there should be an ID for data sets. Dr. Goodman mentioned this idea. It has also occurred. Mike Huerta at the National Library of Medicine has written a position piece on this. And the notion that we should move to data sets that are put into shareable formats, carrying with them an ID and the potential for individual credit, I think is a very good and provocative idea. One last piece of the things that we do in this arena, we do provide a variety of solicitations that fund people to do secondary analyses of existing data sets. These are just a few examples pulled quickly from the guide, but certainly an important area. I do think that I just picked up today's Science, and I read from Bruce Alpers an editorial about the importance of small science, a very powerful piece talking primarily about small science in basic biological research. But the secondary analysis of data sets is an incredibly important way for individual investigators to participate in the generation of new knowledge about clinical subjects. And I do think that the kind of data sharing that we're talking about is absolutely critical for young investigators, indeed for all investigators, in improving the science of medicine. So there are many, many things that could could go further than we have gone already. And this terrific meeting has certainly been very stimulating for me, and I will be carrying a number of the ideas back to my colleagues at the NIH. Thank you.